could stay like this, forever following you. Just don't get too far, and I'll be right where you are. You're a dream that I could finally see. I just want us to always be, to always be. Let's stay here, let's stay here in love. Let's stay here, let's stay here in love.
Good afternoon and welcome to Physiology Friday Live. Today we take a look back over the past few weeks of semester and take stock. We set the scene for the coursework and how to succeed on this assessment. We take some questions and provide some answers in the chat. Guys, stay tuned to find out more. Guys, welcome to episode 2 of Physiology Friday Live. We have Brad in the studio.
How's it going?
Now, we're trying some new stuff today, folks, so you might hear the music in the background. Hopefully, it's been made quiet when we speak. If it doesn't, if it sounds naff, if you don't like it, just let us know in the chat and we'll try and do something about it. First and foremost, the first time that we did Physiology Friday Live, there was no one watching. Like, there's no two ways about it. This time, I think we're on 30, 40 viewers. And yeah, everyone is saying hello in the chat, which is really great to get everybody in. I can see people lining up questions as well, and I will do my utmost best to try and get those questions answered as we move through. I think we should maybe measure some expectations of it. We're not going to be streaming for the rest of Friday evening. So the stream's going to last about an hour. We'll get through as many questions as we can. But first of all, we're going to revisit the last few weeks of semester.
Yep, I have a captive audience, Mike. And so before we get to talking about the assignment, we're going to do a little bit of a revisit of some key material from the last few weeks, like we did last time, just to point out some key things that you might want to make sure you're happy with.
Before we carry on, there's a pig in the room.
There is a pig in the room.
I feel like it needs some context.
Jokes are funny, callback. And those of you who did watch us last time will know Nibbles the pig is back to haunt Mike. Hopefully. Hey.
I feel like I'm not going to overshare this time. I feel like I really put myself out there. That there was no safety net in response, so I feel hesitant to continue. But nevertheless, first of all, I will try and be specific as to who is asking the question. The chat is moving real fast, which is excellent. And just remember, guys, feel free to answer your peers' questions, chat amongst yourselves. Mm-hmm. And as Brad is going through the semester, the recap on the last few weeks' worth of sessions, I'll be looking through the chat and just picking out some questions that we can maybe revisit when we start thinking about the coursework that you guys have all got to do. But I'm going to politely hand over to Dr. Elliott now, who's going to walk through some slides with you, and we'll go from there. Let's get the lights up. Excellent. Nobody can see anything. Just bear with me.
First, we have a nice picture. Yeah, and just to kind of go on that point about some of the questions, a lot of the questions are being repeated in the chat, which is awesome. And so we know that they're important, of course, and so maybe we won't call you out specifically if we have that one chat. And the other point is there's a lot of the stuff being discussed really actively on the discussion board at the moment. And that's really cool to see, because that's what that discussion board's for, is for a place for someone to ask a question, someone to answer, and then it to be recorded for everyone else to read. And so if you do have any questions and we don't get your question today, make sure you check the discussion board, because there's a lot of really good material up there that mimics a lot of the questions we're already seeing coming in. So you've got an opportunity there to take advantage. And also, if I can, just before we launch off, a really big thanks to some of the students, and I wish I'd written down your names so I could call you out specifically, who have been really active on that discussion board, because some of the comments on it have been fantastic. Not just in terms of posing questions, but in terms of giving answers as well. So when someone's been unclear on language, or what we're looking for, then some students have come back and say, hey, I think they might mean this, or what about that? And then we've been able to go through and flag that and say, yeah, that's exactly right. Fantastic job. So yeah, that's us.
Let's head for the first slide.
Fantastic. So before we get to the lab report, and I know this stream is popular this week because of the lab report due next week, before we get to that, we just wanted to highlight a couple of key things from every lecture for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And then maybe if we do one more stream, we'll do this for the remainder of the semester as well. And so we'll have a key point for every lecture you have so far. And the first one's a bit of an interesting one, actually, because this year we tried an experiment and we gave you guys lectures on body fat. This is the first time we've had the lecture of fat in this course. And we did this for 2 reasons. One, fat's kind of an important tissue and it's overlooked all the time. And I hope you got the sense from that. But 2, you might have noticed that this lecture was quite a bit different. And what we were doing here was presenting you with a huge amount of data that was summarized in really interesting and different ways. And a lot of it was graphically summarized. And so that's why I was really keen to get Dr. Jim Parkinson from Optimal Health over to talk to you guys about the research that we're doing at West and about how to take really, really big data sets and present it back. Because that's really specific to your lab report, of course. So hopefully that was useful. And as well as that, there was some physiology in there as well, of course, about cell function, adipocytes, how they're different from normal cells, and some long-term health stuff. And so that was the lecture on adipose, maybe a bit different from what you've seen before. If we move on a slide from there, we had a bit of a topic shift, and we switched into a series of lectures that's actually still going on at the moment. We moved into this idea of respiration, breathing, and acid-base balance. And you may have noticed that this blood lecture was actually the first lecture in a series that's gone on for about 3 weeks about respiration and acid-base. And so the key point from this lecture was probably twofold in my mind. Firstly, what blood is, what it's made of. So I flagged up a key point here about if you take a blood sample from someone, what's in it, what's cells, what's formed elements, what's liquids, what's not. And all their individual functions in terms of immunity, in terms of carrying oxygen, in terms of carrying CO2 in different compartments of those cells. And then secondly, this idea of gaseous exchange back and forth in the stages of it, moving around in terms of O2 movement, in terms of CO2 movement, and with CO2 movement in blood in terms of some of the buffering that we're going to get into in the next few topic areas. Okay, we got some feedback that the music wasn't really working out, so we've killed that. It's good to see.
We've sacked the music off. Gone.
Done.
Anyway.
Moving on from blood. What else do we have? So blood actually linked really explicitly to this idea of breathing. And so I got to come back and give you guys a lecture. It's always fun because I do miss lecturing sometimes. And so key diagrams here. In my mind, the key diagram was probably this idea of pressure gradients. Pressure gradients in the alveoli in this thing called an intrapleural space, and how intrapleural pressure changes drive alveolar changes, and that drives respiration. And we talked about that in the lecture, and I flagged that up in the tutorial as well, so hopefully that was identified as a kind of a key point, that mechanical aspect of breathing. And then linking breathing and that blood lecture together, this idea of the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve, or this graph showing this link between the partial pressure of oxygen and the saturation of hemoglobin in the human body, and how that links to breathing and, of course, to oxygen transfer into tissues and into CO2, in terms of changes of oxygen transfer as well. So as you shift down that oxygen cascade from very high O2 pressure to lower O2 pressures like we find in tissue, we get oxygen movement. And then we even talked about messing with the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve, the Bohr shift, that kind of stuff. So that's all good material there. Next one, fantastic. And then we did what may seem at first like a topic switch, but hopefully we'll get to the point where it actually is linked really heavily. This idea of kidney function or renal function. And the first thing in terms of renal function, probably what we in academia call the threshold concept, the thing that students get most stuck on, is this idea of counter current multiplier, or the movement of water out of that loop of Henle, out of the descending and the ascending loop, and then the movement of ions as well, and how that is regulated in different parts of the descending and then the ascending part of that loop. And even the ascending loop, the thick and the thin part. And there's a lot of numbers written down when you look at the loop of Henle, when you look at filtration. And it can look a bit confusing the first times round, but if you can get the idea of the locations of water movement in that descending loop and in the distal convoluted tubule, and in the ascending part of the loop, the movement of ions, and then the movement of ions actually being what drives the movement of water, kind of current multiplication, then you've kind of got filtration down. If you follow it up with memorizing some of the numbers and understanding them, then you're doing even better again. So that's your kind of point there. And I think this is one of the key diagrams from that lecture to focus on. This one and probably glomerular filtration as well, just before this stage. Key aspects here. Mike is working double shift at the moment, taking comments, and also recording questions as quickly as possible.
Is this the slides you want?
Yep. No, slide back, please.
Oops, sorry.
And so that actually is the, we just told off the controller there. That actually is the summary of where we're up to. So it seems like it's been a long time. And this week, we're also doing more renal stuff. And we're linking together this idea of renal filtration, or production of urine and loss of fluids through the kidneys, and respiration. And you've had lectures this week on more kidney maintenance, and also this idea of acid-base balance. Acid-base balance we'll return to next time we talk to you. But that's really, really key for physiology. If you found the kidney stuff hard, that's okay. Everyone finds renal and kidney stuff hard the first few times through. But it's really core to physiology, and that's why we've focused so much time on it. When you start to mess with acid-base balance in the blood, start to really have physiological problems with health. It can be quite dangerous. But what's really cool about the body's compensation systems, what we're trying to get through is this idea that you can compensate or you can rectify decreases of pH in multiple ways quite quickly through respiration and breathing, losing CO2, metabolic buffering, bicarbonate buffering, that kind of stuff. And also over longer periods of time through renal compensation or using the kidneys to lose hydrogen ions and lose urea and lose byproducts of it. And if one of those isn't working, the other one can try and take up the slack, try and maintain that. And as you stick around in the life sciences, you'll start to see more and more and more what we call pathology, not physiology, or messing with things in the body. And more often than not, breathing and the kidneys are going to be involved in that, which I think is going to be important. And so that's kind of my very quick summary. And we won't spend too much time on that because I know that it's not the primary point you're here today. You're not here to hear me talk about the last few lectures, but I am going to do it anyway. You're not here to see Nibbles the pig, even though he is the star of the show. You're here to talk about something more than that. So let's move on to the star today. Talk about assignment. Interruption from the control.
Okay, my head has been taken off in the chat. I'm desperately trying to keep up with what's going on, and whilst half listening to the words of geekendom, as it were, coming from Dr. Bradley Elliott's face. Before we move on, there does seem to be some key themes coming up with regards to the assessment, which is really good, guys, and thank you very much for sharing those. Absolutely. And I keep trying to extract those off. So before we kick off and going into, so Brad's got a real nice overlay of some of the guidance documents that you guys have got with regards to this assessment. But before we kick off, let's start with like a generic overview of maybe what we're expecting, and how you guys can do the best that you possibly can within this assessment. So, Brad, if you could just start with a generic overview, and then we'll maybe move into how folk on the module can do well, to common mistakes and errors, and then we'll get stuck into some of the questions that have been posted in the chat.
Yeah. So, a big part of this assignment is almost training you to write in a very precise way. And that's this idea of structuring a lab report in an introduction, methods, results, and discussion style, and then adding references and having key aspects of that, having aims, having hypotheses, having an order and a style. And that order and style, if you can pick up the key points from this and translate it into your other modules, into your other lab reports, which you'll be writing throughout your career, and if you stick around science the rest of your life, they always have this kind of structure and flow. And so that's what we're generically looking at here, I think, is that idea of this first time we're going to really help you in terms of structure. I'm giving you a bit of guidance here, this one-page document about how to structure it, how to write it. And hopefully this will really be helpful in future stuff as well.
Thank you for the top level summary. And again, yes, so I am not formally teaching you on this module. However, I do have project students at level 6 and at level 7. I run a master's course there as well. I do research of my own accord. So to be able to start off from day dot, I know some of you all have come from a foundation background, and that's absolutely fine. But to start this early on in your university lives, to generate those skills and develop skill sets around scientific writing is going to be really important for you guys. So with that in mind, Brad, you've been doing this assessment for a couple of years now, or the versions thereof. What, if you were to pick out some of the key things that students tend to do wrong, what would those be? So just generally looking at the chat at the moment, there seems to be a lot of questions around the interpretation of the aims, and also specifically, how do the aims and the presentation of the results link together? Is there any advice that you can give to our viewers today to try and to help with those things? So let's maybe start with just common issues that people face, and then maybe moving more specifically into handling the aims, and then how you can then structure your results section from there.
Yeah. So one of the most common issues I reckon when we do assignments like this is, for lack of a better word, something called alignment. Is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to link all your different sections together in a logical way. So when you write an introduction, you're trying to justify an experiment that you're going to do. And that introduction is a logical argument that is then summarized by an aim. So having written my introduction, my aim is really obvious. And my hypothesis, or what I think is going to happen, really logically emerges from that. The methods that I write down answer my aim and hypothesis, and my results emerge logically and answer hypothesis. And then the discussion is kind of like, having produced these new results, what do I now know to be the case? My results plus introduction. So that probably the biggest top level thing that we see again and again and again, not just for you guys, but at our level 6, sometimes we're not, is what's the continuity of story?
Yeah.
When I've introduced a topic, have I answered it with results? Have I put it in context? It's quite hard to do something.
I totally agree. So just to help with facilitating, getting some advice. So Nadia's coming here. Thank you very much for your question, Nadia. She said, could you please explain this question from right up? So it says, when graphing grip force over time, which is aim 1, consider if the best way of displaying this data is in absolute values in kilos. Is there another way? Now, we're not going to give you the answers here, guys. We're going to expand your minds to try and get you to come to that conclusion yourself. But I feel like that would act as a nice framework to maybe open up a bit of discussion about how an aim can link to the outcome, and then sort of working around that question, really. So let's stick with that. I'll leave it on the screen. So
yeah, that's quite useful. So this idea of alignment comes back again, and I think you can see that really clearly in the way we've structured this kind of pro forma for the lab report. This is your first aim, this is your first result. Exactly, grip strength over time to answer your first aim with your first key results figure. And then what we're saying here, what I'm saying quite explicitly, is you could graph time and grip force in kilos, and that would be fine. And that's a perfectly valid way of showing it. And I've had some discussion with some people on the discussion board about this, and I've got a sinking suspicion when we were flicking through the chat just then, we also saw someone else commenting about this as well. I think you'll find it was Douglas. See his there. Exactly this topic, is that grip force, kilos, and time, fine. There's nothing wrong with it, absolutely. But there could be a better way of doing it, because, here we go. It's exactly the comment. As Douglas referred to it, the standard deviation, the error was quite variable. It's one of the problems when you look at strength in a large group of people like we did. We had 100 results initially, and I think I smoothed it down to 60 results. with 60 people. We had some younger people, some older people, some very strong people, some very not very strong.
Population
variation.
people.
Exactly, a population of variable people. And the data was variable, so is there a way of normalizing?
Normalizing is a good word.
Normalizing is a good word,
Yeah.
isn't it? Normalizing the data to their individual base. Interesting points. And that's, I think, as far as I can go there without gifting it.
I think, normalizing is a good word to use. It's a search term that you could use to try and see how you could normalize a data set in relation to a different variable. Could be a good way of doing that. And then, again, we're not here to give you the answers. That's not what Physiology Friday Live is all about. It's about encouraging you to seek out the information for yourselves, using your brains, applying your knowledge and thinking innovatively. Because essentially, if we sit and tell you exactly how we would present we're going to produce a bunch of level 4 Mikes and Brads. We don't want that. No, the world doesn't need any more versions of us. However, we would like you to try and approach that question with your own interpretation in mind. But as Douglas has pointed out, and thank you again, Nadia, for raising the question, but seeing how we can try and handle this inherent variability that you get within large populations, but also then trying to get it so that people are comparable against one another. This is an ongoing thing that you will be faced with throughout the rest of your university life and into your professional life as well. If you're dealing with large data sets and such like. Now, one question that does keep cropping up in the chat, we're going to move it on because we've got to keep going through the questions. So hopefully that addresses how you might link aims, results, interpret some of those aims, and go away and find out more information about handling variable data. One question that does keep coming up in the chat is this issue around ethical considerations of the data collection. So I was wondering if you could maybe touch on that on behalf of the students to sort of expand on why are they asking this question and how they can then sync that into their lab report.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and one that I have to admit I didn't see coming, so good on you all for considering it. Because when we do science, I think the ethical considerations are so key. And one of the things I think, and I don't know, so tell me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the places this is coming from, nice comment there, DJ HRXVIII, I came here for answers. One of the places I think this question is coming from is what we call learn by doing. We've given you all a bunch of papers to read and said, well, one of the ways you can learn about scientific style is read other people's work and then almost mimic the style. And you've all identified really quickly, the first sentence of everyone's method says the ethical approval for the study was.
Yeah.
And that's because when we do science research and publish it, we have to have ethical oversight. Just a life. And if that doesn't exist, we can't do it and would be bad science. When we do teaching science like this, we don't have that same ethical oversight. It doesn't mean I can be too mean to them. We do have some rules and laws we have to follow, but this research hasn't been to an ethics committee that this is okay to do. And because of that, there's actually some ups and downs of that. One of the biggest downsides is that I couldn't take this data and publish it. It's a real shame in some way, but also probably for the best because that way I don't abuse my students.
Indeed, yeah.
So in short, you don't need to worry about, oh, I'm not too close to my mic. Thank you all for that. I need to talk into my mic like a professional, not like this.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks
That's helpful. We don't always know, so
it's really useful. So yeah, basically, you don't need an ethics statement at the start of your method section.
Good stuff. Thank you for that response there. We've got people trying to tease in. So as Kaz has come in and asked, how can a result be used to check? Used to be a check of the data. What does this mean?
So one of the aims, I think I've actually explicitly said, use aim 3 as a check of your data, is if we know from prior literature what's going to happen, and we're relatively sure of that, like for example in aim 3, which we are relatively sure about, that's been published and done to death, we're very good on the relationship between muscle strength and muscle volume, then that's a quality check. If the relationship between those two variables is what we expect to see from prior published literature, then we know that our experiment might have worked. It's a kind of positive control, if that makes sense. And so that's what we're looking for there essentially, is do your results mimic that which other people have been done before, and thus did our experiment work? And that's all.
Good stuff. Danielle has come in and asked, I think you said on the discussion boards to use actual change versus percentage change, which is an interesting way of looking at that data set, but I have no idea how to plot that. Could you give us a little hint?
Oh, that's an interesting point.
I think I might step in here and say, because again, unfortunately, we're not here to do your assessment for you, because we've got our undergraduate degrees, and we don't want to repeat that. So
as fun as they were,
indeed, indeed, we're all learning, guys. So, just to step in here, Daniel, what I would say to you and everyone who's listening today, that consider that if you're looking at a percentage change over a time point, for example, then obviously you're going to be expressing in the time value, as in when you have 2 time points, you'll have 2 variables on a given axis. Whereas when you transfer towards a percentage change, suddenly you have 1. So you need to think about whether you're going to express that as a point change from 0, or whether you are just going to go straight up with a single bar graph that you would go for. But that's up to you to decide. And the best way of answering that for yourself is to open up Excel, open up Sheets, you open up whatever graphing software that you're using, and have a play with the data. What looks best to you based on the reading that you've done, the exposure to the different research papers that you might have looked into to see what's the best way of presenting data. The best way is to just get your hands on the data, do percentage change, plot it out from 0, plot it out with in relation to the first time point, to the second time point, however it is that you feel is going to be appropriate, and then come up with a decision, because ultimately it's you that's going to have to make a decision as to which one goes into the final report. So thank you for asking. Apologies for being a bit generic, but I think there's enough there for you to go off and do something interesting with it. Okay, let's have a look here. Okay, Peter is claiming that many of the bio students want to know grip strength fatigue within highly controlled experiments can be used to study muscle function with well-defined results. I don't know where we're going with this. I feel like I should have scanned your question before I went in with that, Peter.
You did dive into that one, not knowing where it's going to end.
If you want to finish that one off, Peter, that we will try and address the question. Nadia's come in with another question. Here we've got, are you allowed to include images from published data for comparison in the discussion section? That's an interesting question, is what I would say, because it's the thing that comes up across levels, across courses, the whole lot. So there we are.
It's not commonly done in the literature, but you could describe what other people have said, and you can do it. Just if you are going to do it, make sure to reference that person and make sure you're being clear. This is not your result. This is someone else's that you're comparing your literature to.
My take on this, and again, what you might be gathering from here is there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to that particular question, but typically within the discussion section, it would be continuous prose, and you would not necessarily be bringing in additional figures at this point. And that's fairly consistent across most professionally published research out there. And as such, the problem with putting a figure in the discussion section is that you might not have the amount of words left in your word count in order to accurately describe it. And as such, if you're making a specific point within your discussion section which refers back to your own results, which is what the discussion section is there for, then you might want to be a little bit more selective about which data you then choose to extract from that particular figure, because the figure will tell you lots of different things, but there might be a single comparison that you're trying to draw. So maybe
that's a very good summary, actually.
Perhaps the take-home message here is that it's continuous prose. It's uncommon to use additional figures, and typically, I would say as well, if you wanted to use somebody else's figure, you would probably go away and redraw it yourself, because then it becomes redrawn from Elliott et al., whatever it would be. I would take caution on that. I think you could probably do that with words, including some of the means or standard deviation comparisons, maybe some of the statistical significance values that have been reported as well. So maybe a little bit of caution on that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair summary indeed. Saw that's an interesting one now.
Which one, sorry?
Do we have to explain the results in the results or just describe them? That's just scroll up a little bit for us.
Sorry.
Yeah, perfect. All caps. So, quite a common question, I think, that one.
Okay,
and it's probably worth addressing. Do we have to explain the results in the results or just describe them? And so that comes up a lot, I think, doesn't it? In a results section, you are very simply saying, very cold-heartedly, this is what's happened in your figures. So you're almost showing a result, and then underneath that saying, figure 1 shows something increased or something decreased or something didn't change in cold-hearted language and with numbers and precision. But, sorry, microphone, shouldn't do that, should I? How very professional. But you shouldn't go into much description of them because that's for the discussion. All you're trying to do is say what you should see there and what the key points about it you want to point out to someone. The discussion of your results is the discussion. And then you can go into deeper meaning about the results, what you think it might mean, what's going on there. And it can be hard, I think, to separate in people's minds, can't it? That difference between, it can be hard to separate that difference between what goes in a results section and what goes in a discussion section. Results section being just descriptions of findings, discussions being interpretations of findings, if that makes sense.
Excellent, good stuff. There's been a few questions mentioned, just to keep the ball rolling, regarding word counts.
Okay.
So 2,000 word limit.
Yep, 2,000 words.
What's the wiggle room? Is there any?
Oh, the wiggle room. Everyone wants to know what can I mess with. So thanks to a slightly old-fashioned policy, an archaic policy perhaps, the university gives you 10% wiggle room on top of any word limit in any assignment. So in this case, with 2,000 words, you've actually got 2,200. And the reason that exists, I like to tell people this, is because word counting algorithms, I guess, between different software used to be very variable.
Yeah.
And so we used to get different results if you did it in Word versus in, I can't think of another typing word processing software.
Lesser processing software.
Other software does exist. Other software is available. And so that's the issue there. And so we give you a bit of wiggle room above it. Some people would say 10% plus or minus. That's 10% plus. If you you don't have a lower limit of words, if you can adequately answer a question and fit all the information you need in to answer it, then that's okay if you're within that word limit. So don't feel like you have to add an extra 100 words to get to 1,800 or 1,900. That's okay. And that's a common point of issue, I think, is one of the common areas we see is students do a really good job and then feel like they have to write 500 more words to try and fill in the gap.
Concision is a skill, is what I would say, and being able to edit your own work so that you're not going off on a huge tangent and waffling about nothing can actually be detrimental. So do factor that in. DJ, it's upsetting to hear that London Met is doing better than us, is what I would say. You need to get in touch with your personal tutor ASAP. And if you don't know who that is, then get in touch with one of us and we can get that sorted out for you. So moving on though, someone, Akbar Khan has said here, can you include a video such as a TED Ed video as a reference?
Yeah, Akbar, I'd be wary of that. We're looking for quality of references here as well. Our gold standard for quality references is, of course, the primary peer-reviewed literature, the published work that is experimental and peer-reviewed. So it's been through a rigorous process.
I mean, like, lest we not forget, that TED Ed talk that you're making reference to there will have originally come from some form of peer-reviewed research.
Yeah, that's
if it's
a very good point.
any good. And as such, like that extra step that you take in order to go onto PubMed, to go onto Google Scholar, to go onto website, whatever it is, the university library, heaven forfend, and actually go to the original source and make your own interpretation of the findings of that particular research paper is the next level in terms of cognitive ability and moving through your university life. So let's not think about popular media. Let's not think about magazines, newspapers, or TED Ed talks or anything like that. Let's go to the kind of the good quality sources, the peer-reviewed papers, which is where all of that original research is going to come from.
And I think kind of on that point of referencing and quality material, one of the really perhaps obvious key points, but you'd be surprised how much it doesn't occur, is that we've given you 3 key papers that might be really useful, and each of them contains at least one result or one point that's really, really useful. Yeah. So if you've got 3 key papers that must be really useful in some way, maybe, just maybe, they should be cited at some point in your report. And I think that it sounds facetious when I say it, I'm sorry, but you'd be surprised how often students forget that the required reading is required for a reason. And so what is it there that you've missed if you don't think it's citable? What's important about that?
Another common theme that's coming through at the moment is, Farah has asked here, do we need p-values? And I think the larger question here is the level of statistical analysis that's required. So within the results section, what are we expecting? What are the students expected to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Farah, and I think that's good to point out and talk about. One of the things that, for the sake of fairness, we have to do is we can't assess you on things we haven't taught you yet. And so, for example, most of you haven't done basic statistics at a university level, so we can't assess you on basic statistics yet. That means you get a bit of a free ride in terms of t-tests, ANOVAs, Pearson's correlations, if you do any correlations. And that means we're not expecting you to do those things, and we're not expecting you to do therefore report the results of that statistical analysis. So you don't need to include p-values, short answer. You don't need to do higher statistical analysis yet. You will need to do them in future assignments, and we'll try and make that clear to you when it comes up. Of course, if you were to do it and do it well, your marker might feel like that was deserving of a little extra, shall we say? But we're not expecting it, and we will never mark you down for it not being present at this level.
So just, again, for absolute clarity on behalf of the student, it's still possible to get the highest end of marks, even if you don't have the statistical comparisons in there. Exactly. So nice to have. Don't get you wrong. Will add value, I think, to your report. But if you didn't include them and everything else was still top tier stuff, then you're still going to do really well in the assessment. So hopefully that makes that exceptionally clear to everybody in the thing. We've got 80 people watching.
Oh, we just
last time we had 7. So
an order of magnitude more. We're crashing into it.
I'm trying desperately to keep up with the chat as well, folks. So do keep posting your questions if you have them.
Couple of questions.
Here's another nice question from Inbisat. Do we also need to submit Excel documents showing our results along with our lab report? So almost like submitting the raw data.
Yeah, I just saw that pop up with someone else as well. In short, no. One of the points of a write-up like this, like any sort of lab report, any sort of scientific summary, is summarizing complex data. I want to see your summaries. I don't want to see how you got there. I don't need your methods, your workings, your formula, your raw data. We gave you the raw data. You give us back the summary. So all we need from you is that single lab report document.
Just a quick question, a potentially tricky question to answer on at this level, but what do we do with results? So this is for Vadish. Thank you very much for submitting the question. What do we do with results that have missing values? For example, the result is missing the height. I assume on an individual out of the many individuals that you'll have.
There is indeed one individual who has the height value missing.
Okay.
And then it is a surprisingly deep and meaningful question, isn't it? Indeed. And we're not going to go down that rabbit hole today. For today, I think the point of leaving that at is, does height matter to any of your calculations? Does it matter to any of your results? If it does matter, we've got a problem. If it doesn't matter, if you don't use height at all, is it an issue? And
good question.
Therein lies the issue. Therein lies the answer, I think, and that I don't think it's a major.
Okay, another question, which I think is some of those nuanced things that I think is a potential trap for students. So let's get it cleared up. Stoyanova, I apologize if I have pronounced anybody's name wrong today. Do we need a table of data corresponding to the graph? So almost this idea, and I think that I'm going to make it explicitly clear for everybody, that you might have a figure, it might be a line graph, might be a bar graph, or a box plot, whatever it is, but then underneath it you then have a second table which also documents or shows maybe the mean, standard deviation, standard error of the mean, whatever it is you've chosen to present your data as, which is shown in like figure 1. Yeah. What should we do about that?
Yeah, and so they are commonly used in results sections of scientific literature, and you'll have seen them before. In this assignment, we're not asking for you to do a table summary for us. If you do want to report, say, means or mean changes or those kind of quantifiable precision, they can go in the text of your results. So when you're describing a figure and you're saying, well, look, this went from 15 millimeters mercury to 20 millimeters mercury, then you could say that in text, and that would be the place for it.
Or a mean change of 5 millimeters. My take on this is generally that you don't want to be repeating data in two different formats. So, for example, in that example that I gave there, that you might have the means and standard deviations on a line or a bar graph, but then repeat the means and standard deviations of that data in a table. You're repeating the same data set. So pick one, and the one that you think is most appropriate for your assessment. But in the circumstances that you were talking about, which is something I didn't consider, is that you might have your figure 1, which has got the means and standard deviations, but then you report percentage change or a comparison between the 2 time points that you might be interested in, because that's different data. You're adding value by including that.
Exactly.
You're not repeating. So hopefully that helps.
You're accentuating a figure with the interpretation of it.
So a bit more of a top level question here from, I've just lost it. Let me just see if I can find it again. Here we go. We've got Arena coming in and saying, I don't really get it. What is the purpose of the introduction and what do we have to write there? Because I discussed and explained all the points you wrote in the introduction based on research I've done. So maybe taking a bit of a step back and thinking more holistically about the introduction section on this assessment, what would your best advice to be? Things that you can do well, maybe things to try and avoid.
Yeah. So it's a really good top level question, isn't it? This idea, Arena, I think it was, is that what is an introduction for? An introduction is to convince your reader that your aim and hypothesis are justified. And so what I kind of did in this introduction pro forma I've given you is give you 4 bullet points to talk about in order that should help you justify that aim and hypothesis. And that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for some text that describes what we know about the literature, what we know about this condition, what we know about physiology. And then from there, we've got a minor technical problem going on, but that's
My
fine.
apologies. I clicked the wrong button. Let's go back.
We have a lot of buttons to worry about. From there, your introduction is taking literature and using it to build an argument to focus your reader to your aim and hypothesis. If you've done a good introduction, having read it, I always say this to all of my students at every level. If you read your introduction and try and pretend to be someone else so you don't know what you're trying to say, and then you get to the aim and hypothesis at the end of it, is that the most logical outcome? And if your aim and hypothesis seems like the most logical outcome to the introduction you've written, you've done really well because you're creating an argument for your reader.
Good stuff. We're getting some extra questions with regards to introductions. So, Elsie, I think it is. I apologize if I spelled that out. Elsie, do we need to include published results for each aim in the discussion section? A degree of interpretation is required here to what your question means. I think what do you mean? Do you need to justify or consider the context of your results in relation to previously published literature, maybe?
If that's the interpretation, then yes.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Because your discussion is, of course, the interpretation of your findings in light of the material that's come before it. Or another way of saying it is your discussion is your introduction smushed together with your results. Your introduction was creating an argument for your aim and hypothesis. Your discussion is, in light of that material, plus your results, some new thing, some new interpretation, some new ideas, something new should hopefully emerge from that. And so that's what we're looking for. So yes, your discussion will be heavily referenced, of course, and it will hopefully be in line with this reference, here we found this, or despite what we expected from this reference, here we have something else.
Khaled coming in with a comment with regards to chat etiquette. Please don't shout, peeps.
All of the
Be
all
polite.
caps going on.
Indeed. We are no more less likely or more likely to read out your question if you write it in all capitals. So thank you for Khaled for maintaining the etiquette of the chat. Maybe we'll make you a moderator in future.
I like the enthusiasm, but
it also makes it more difficult to read if your question is in all caps, which is why all the UK road signs are all in lowercase, because it's easier to read.
Is that right?
That is correct.
I did not know that.
Because you're more likely to look at a road, the place name as a whole image rather than a word. And if the whole word is in caps, it's not the most familiar way that you're used to seeing it. So if you see like London, if it was in all caps, you're more likely to see if it was in.
And read it in your head as shouting.
Indeed. So thank you it's nice to see you're all self-moderating, which is fantastic. So I came up across a question which I've now lost, which I think it was by Sophia. Yes, here we go. So the specific question that Sophia has asked here is about aim 2 on reasons why our hypothesis about blood pressure was wrong. How accurate must we be? There might be many reasons. So I think to take that question as maybe a framework, but also then considering the results section and maybe some best practice techniques from you, Brad, about how to handle what is quite rich data, maybe quite a lot of data as well. How can you emphasize different points, but also maybe in the context there with regards to the fact that hypothesis wasn't, your hypothesis was wrong, or maybe it was a null hypothesis, for example, or the alternative hypothesis. I haven't seen your hypothesis, so I don't know. So
first off, I think don't stress out about a hypothesis being wrong, Sophia, or anybody. Hypotheses are wrong all the time. I'd say I'm wrong more often than I'm right when I write a hypothesis down. That's okay. In terms of interpretation of why you might be wrong, this is actually great. This is free reign. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you can come up with a whole bunch of ideas, and as long as they're logical and common sense and reasonable, that's brilliant.
To temper that maybe a little bit, that your interpretation, if you can build on the existing results that you have, because you can say with some certainty that you measured that particular variable in your population, and as such, if you can then try and interpret what are the reasons around that, why that hypothesis was incorrect based on the data that you have in the first
best
instance.
Case scenario.
Yeah, but there is, because we're talking about an academic report here. In your discussion, please do expand. There is a lot of leeway in comparison to professional publishing, where if you started, real blue sky thinking within the discussion section, reviewer 2 comes in and says, "This is absolutely obscene. Like, what are you basing this on?"
That's what reviewer 2 sounds like. We all know this.
While smoking a cigar, but never mind.
I was thinking a pipe.
A pipe,
An actual pipe.
yeah.
But
Yeah, so there is definitely scope there, I think, for you to think outside the box, but do try and base it on your own variables first, and then expand from there.
I think there's some logical stuff that's been discussed on the discussion board about reasons why you might not have met your hypothesis as expected, and there's some absolute goldmine of information there to have a chat and look at.
Yeah, so Faraz come in with another question with regards to RefWorks. Using RefWorks would be fine to use for referencing in this report.
Of course, mate, absolutely.
Yeah.
I cannot remember the last time I wrote a reference out by hand. That's ridiculous. It's really hard, and the details of where to put your full stop, where to put your comma, what Harvard looks like.
Yep.
I don't want to have to remember that.
Well, University, Westminster, Harvard.
Yes, exactly. And so we have guidelines, we publish them, but there's nothing wrong with using software like RefWorks, Cite Where You Write, Mendeley, the resources the university offers you. That's brilliant. My only piece of advice there would be to check it once you've done it. Just because a piece of software did it for you, don't trust it to be perfect. Yeah, you can always edit it afterwards.
You want to be doing a 10% check on that, just to double check.
100%.
No one's asked this question, but I'm going to ask it. Like, do you have an expectation in terms of the number of references?
Oh, I did see that one pop up actually earlier on. 'Cause that's a classic question, isn't it?
It is.
We always get asked that. Any given assignment that has references, how many references do we have? And I really always struggle to answer this question, I think, because it's hard to pin down a number. More than a couple, less than 20, just a level expectation. You need some. They should be relevant to the work. Don't feel like you have to tack on references to look good, because that happens as well. That's why I don't like saying, give me 10 references. That's not a fair expectation on my behalf. A handful among friends.
Yeah.
A few, not too many. It's a hard thing to say out loud. I know I get that, but it's not a precise answer.
There's Liza uses this rule of thumb, which is a reference per 100 words.
That's interesting.
So with this in mind, then up to 20 is what I would say.
Yeah, that would be. If someone gave me 20 references, I'd look twice, because that's a lot for first years as well.
It's also a lot, considering a large proportion of this will be a method section, of which you won't necessarily be referencing specific materials from.
And we have talked about that, I think, in their guidelines, is that references are introduction and discussion. Never results in very, very rarely methods.
Yeah. Exactly, unless you are replicating the methodology of a given publication. But so maybe take that. If you took the 100 words, one reference per 100 words, but consider that your entire document is not just your introduction and your discussion, and then you could then take a little bit of advice from there. But maybe
Great.
20 would be too many.
Great question right there in the middle.
Oh, sorry, go.
That's fine. Do we need to add our names or student numbers to your reports from, is it HERA? Is it? You don't. You don't need to put your names or ID numbers on these reports. And that's terrifying sounding at first, but because we do anonymous marking at the University of Westminster, when you upload it to Blackboard, it gets assigned an identifier so we know who you are. And then when we get them, they're anonymous, so we mark them truly blind. Then when we put your markup, it gets associated back to you. So there's no need to put a name or ID number on your reports. And that seems bizarre, I get that. But that's because we do anonymous marking on purpose. And there's lots of research on how that's fairer for you guys.
We've just got a bit of feedback that the mics are still pretty quiet. I've just bumped the sound up a bit, so do let us know if you can hear us better. It's a tricky one, guys, because we're in an absolutely massive room. So to avoid it sounding really echoey, and also for our mics to not talk to one another, which would cause an echo, we need to wind the mics back a little bit. Yeah, Dr. Piggleton here is not going to help with that. So Vadish has come in with an interesting question here. Is it acceptable to provide a picture for the method section to how an example of an example of how the arm was positioned?
That is a good, insightful question. And not only is it acceptable, I think it's actually almost common practice to have a methods figure sometimes. And so you're welcome. And I think the instructions suggest you might want to use a method picture if you'd like. So feel free to use one. What that can be all sorts of different things. That's an interesting suggestion, and that's quite a good one. So yes, Vardish, feel free to use a picture or an image or a diagram in your methods if you'd like to.
Is that I'm going to expand a little bit because I'm, as you know, very passionate about methodology figures, because I feel like
things to be passionate about. Number one, methodology figures.
We're going to do a highlights reel, I think, maybe for Christmas, and chat about pigs and tents and passionate about. Anyway, we don't claim to be cool, all right? We're not here to be cool. We're not paid to be cool. We're paid to do science. So here we all are.
My mum says I'm cool.
My mum thinks I'm a school PE teacher. So there we are. Who knew? Is it very passionate about figure diagrams. So I would question, Vadish, is whether that particular image that you have in mind adds the most amount of value to your method section.
Interesting.
Because it might only focus on one particular variable, when in actual fact you've got lots of variables, or more specifically, if you were to generate your own figure, which demonstrates the protocol which you actually undertook. Because people are a well-designed protocol figure is far more easier and quicker to understand than reading a block of text which says exactly the same thing. And it's an old notion, but a picture says 1,000 words.
You're giving my lecture on this next year because that's everything I said on this topic.
So again, just bear that in mind. How much value can you add to your method section by being innovative, by including figures that you've designed yourself, which represent the methodology that you've used, is what I would say.
Brilliant.
Excellent. So, Tasnim, I haven't pre-read your question, so we're going to go out there on a limb again. My question is, the graph of grip force over time stay linear, and there is not much... Spoiler alert! Jeez! There is not much difference. So shall the hypothesis be wrong or rejected?
Oh, so I think if I'm interpreting this, is Tasman saying that
Tasnim,
sorry. Yep. My eyes, I'm getting to be an old man now, saying that over time stays linear, so it's not really changing very much in his interpretation. So should the hypothesis be wrong or rejected? I'm going to let that one slide. I
think that's up to you.
I'm sorry, Tasman. I'm going to have to.
Tasnim, it depends on exactly how you've written your hypothesis, because we don't know what your alternative or negative hypothesis is going to be. And as such, we couldn't give direction if we wanted to. And more specifically, it's your interpretation of the figure is what we're assessing you're on.
Yeah.
So soz, but you're going to have to figure that one out by yourself.
Soz.
Yeah, I know, sorry. Look, I'm a lot younger than you.
You sadly, that's true.
I could get away with it. I say that and people may disagree in the chat, and that's absolutely fine. Okay, the chat is slowing down a bit, which is maybe indicative of that everyone is absolutely crystal clear about what the hell's going on. Okay, how much details do we need to add on the title of the graph?
So for the sake of clarity and interpretation of that question, I'm going to reinterpret that as how much details do we add to the figure caption of that graph.
Indeed.
And just to be clear, because of course in scientific literature, our figures don't have titles, they have figure captions below them. And it'll say something like figure 1 and then a description of what that figure shows. Have a look at some of the example literature we've posted for you to read into. But the key take-home point there is if you looked at the figure, the graph, plus the figure caption below it, you should be able to interpret that and get everything you need from it. So how many people are on it, if there's 2 lines, a grey line and a black line, what grey is, what black is, if there's error bars, what do the error bars represent, what's on the X and Y axis. And those are the kind of details you're looking for.
I can see why this comes up, and it's a problem across all levels. And that's because when you generate a new figure or a chart or a graph in Excel, it by default gives you a title.
Yeah.
Just click it and delete it because you don't need it.
Yeah. Excel is ultimately accounting software, and we use it in a scientific way. Yep. And that's the problem now.
Yeah. Hopefully that clears that up for you. To contrast this, however, to tables do have not a heading, but they have a table descriptor which goes at the top, which helps to differentiate from a figure. So please do bear that in mind when you are differentiating between your tables and your figures.
Scientists, we're a bit weird, sorry.
Yeah, there's just these rules that you've just got to comply to. So, okay. There's a question here with regards in BSAT. How do we do well in the lab report, and what does a good lab report include?
Oh, that's such a big question. I'm so into that question.
Before you answer it as well, Stacey Ann, oh my God, that's such a general answer. Yeah. We're trying our best here, but we can't believe it. We can't do it all for you.
Sorry, Stacey Ann.
Anyway, Imbecit, let's go.
I saw that pop up as well. So let's just pop on to some finishing points, because we are actually getting along in the process now. And so we want to get to some finishing off points in your lab reports, right? And what I'm seeing in the comments is a lot of people saying, hey, we're almost done already. Good for us. And that's brilliant, absolutely. So how do we get the big marks in the lab? How do we really get big marks in lab reports? Would be things like, okay, now let's just put it down for a second and come back to it tomorrow or the next day and look at the details. Try and look at your lab report with a fresh set of eyes and try and finish it off. So if you read over it, is it what we'd call formally or professionally written? Is the grammar and the spelling correct? Do you read a sentence and know what you're trying to say? That kind of stuff. That's the difference between a good lab report and a great lab report. The finishing details, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know how to better. Yeah, it's a tough one.
The thing is, like, ultimately, in the assessment guidance, there's some key headings there, and there's lots of guidance in red text. Essentially, if you're reading through that guidance and you've missed out an element, you're going to lose marks. Yeah. So the easiest way to do the best lab report is to ensure that you have all of the elements. Because let's just put this into context. Say, for example, you submit your lab report and you've only got a discussion section. 2,000 words of a discussion section. You have immediately capped the marks that you're going to get because you don't have all the rest of the different components. So you might have written a really great discussion over that 2,000 words. And this isn't, don't get me wrong, this is an obscene example, but it hammers the point home that 2,000 word discussion, because it has a heavy weighting or there's lots of marks associated to it, yeah, but it's not all the marks. So you need to make sure that every single element that you've been asked for has been included, because if you're not including them, you're reducing the likelihood that you're going to score well in the assessment. Basic advice, but trust me, you can be guaranteed that someone will have omitted a section or they've not included whatever thing. Just maybe to build on the point there with regards to sense checking your work. So one of the biggest skills you will learn through your university life is being able to identify when you've got something, an idea that's held inside your head that you're writing about on the page, which makes complete sense to you, but when somebody else reads it, they don't have a clue what you're talking about. And this is more likely to occur if you don't proofread your work, because what you need to do is step back, read it and go, would this make sense to somebody else? Or is this making assumptions about prior knowledge that's in my head but isn't written on the page? Yeah. And that making that differentiation will make your writing a lot clearer, and it will also ensure that you put in confirmatory statements or summative statements at the end of a paragraph which explicitly tells the assessor what you think about this particular thing. Yeah. And that is very important in your discussion section, that you're going to be drawing in elements of your results. You're going to be drawing in the reading that you've been doing and making comparisons between the two. But unless you explicitly say, as a result, taken together, in conclusion, we don't know what you're thinking about. And it's not our job as the assessor to draw those comparisons on your behalf. So just be very clear about that if you don't sense check your work, sometimes it doesn't read as well as you think it does because we don't have the ideas that you have in your head. So hopefully that helps.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Okay, so we've got in thanks, lots of help. 5 exclamation marks nonetheless.
I'm taking it.
Farah's been spamming the chat here with regards to the referencing style. You can generate your referencing style in whichever way that you feel is appropriate. So, for example, Google Scholar will allow you to copy out a particular style, and if you want to do it by hand, you can do it like that.
PubMed will let you download it. All sorts of ways.
Exactly. But RefWorks, you can customize the formatting, the setting. You can export at the end when you're just about ready to submit, and that works for you.
Yeah.
Our advice.
And if you've only got a couple, you can always just type them out by hand, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly,
okay too.
Exactly. And this boils down to it's better to have a reference section with 3 references than no references at all. We've already talked about how many references that you might want to consider. And if you've got more than 10, then maybe a reference manager like RefWorks would be a good way of doing that.
It can just make your life easier. That's all we're saying.
And also investment of time now for long-term gain because you're going to be referencing your entire university life. Then it's maybe not such a bad thing to do. Okay, guys, I think we're at, Mr. Piggleton's hit the deck. We're at 3 minutes past 4.
Been an hour. Wow.
It's been an hour.
Chat.
So, we're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. Guys, if you enjoyed the video today, please click like. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so because we're going to be doing another one. There was a question about whether you're going to be covering some of the content ahead of the lecture.
That was good, good to see thinking
exam,
ahead,
sorry.
It?
Yeah.
So we do aim to try and get one more of these in as long as we can convince Dr. Mike Newell here, our technical / director / organizing star who does all this, for one more day. We don't have that many weeks left in the semester, do we? So I think we will try and squeeze one more in, week 11, week 12 perhaps.
But the question is, can we get a Christmas tree in here?
Can we have...
might play havoc with the green screen, mind. But
we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, short story, yes, I think we will have one more and we'll have a look at the exam, methods for that, study techniques, things to watch out for when you do an exam and that kind of deal. If we have missed a question today, do have a look at the discussion board because there's been a lot of repetition between questions asked today and questions already answered on the discussion board. So that's a great resource. That's a
We're
great
getting
comment,
nutritional
Danielle.
recommendations here. Excellent.
I don't think we could have pigs in the blanket and not offend one of the 3 presenters we have today.
He's here representing, which is good. Guys, I'm really sorry, but we do have to call it a day. But you have the discussion board?
We have the discussion board.
Yep.
We'll be checking on that. I will go back and police that this evening, and as a rare occasion, have a look at it this weekend, perhaps even.
Indeed.
But yes.
Right, guys. Thank you so much for the chat today. Engagement has been fantastic. We've had about 80, 90 people at some points
Loving it.
to get through. And do you know what, guys? I feel like you need to channel this enthusiasm into your report over the weekend so that you can optimize the marks that you get. So thank you once again. Thank you, Brad, for coming into the studio getting involved.
Thank you, Mike, for organizing and facilitating.
What we're here for, guys. And as always, like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel so you get informed of next time we go live, and we will aim to get another Physiology Friday live session ahead of the Christmas break.
Brilliant.
Guys, thank you very much for listening. The chat will continue after the stream amongst yourselves. Me and Brad, I've got 2 kids to go home and bath. Brad's got
an incredibly boring filming meeting to go to.
Well, there we are. Riveting. So thank you very much for your engagement again. The stream is all for you guys. So have a great weekend. Do a great job on your assignments, and we will look forward to the next episode of Physiology Friday Live.
See you all
Take
later.
it easy, guys. Take it easy.